Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. There is a significant debate surrounding the name of God, with two main positions. The first argues that God's name is Yahoo, while the second claims it is Yahu. But which of these versions would be the most accurate? Which one should we follow? I want to make it clear that I respect all opinions on this topic, but based on linguists specialized in Afro-Asiatic languages and studies of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, I will share the view and opinion grounded in this field. In this video, I will present the reality behind God's name. Is it Yahoo or is it Yahu? Which of these forms would be the most correct? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with people who also want to understand which is the most accurate form of this name. The true pronunciation of God's name. Before we start discussing the topic, I'd like to make an important observation for all of you. It is crucial to understand that during the time of Moses, and even before that, the Israelites did not speak ancient Hebrew, as is often assumed, but rather a form of Phoenician. In fact, the ancient Israelites spoke a kind of Proto-Aramaic, an early version of Aramaic. This becomes clear in Deuteronomy 26, where Jacob is referred to as the wandering Aramean, a reference to the language and culture of that time. This knowledge comes from various studies conducted by linguists and experts in the history of the Israelites. One of the most renowned works on this subject is the ancient Canaanites, the civilization before the Israelites, which argues that when the Israelites arrived in Canaan, they adopted a Canaanite language. Before this, however, they did not speak the Canaanite dialect nor Phoenician, but it is possible they used another language, perhaps an ancestral Semitic tongue, before fully integrating culturally and linguistically with the peoples of Canaan. Therefore, it is interesting to realize that the language of the Israelites was not the one we typically associate with the people of Israel, but rather a linguistic adaptation and evolution influenced by neighboring civilizations. It is important to emphasize here that in order to understand God's name correctly, we need knowledge of grammar, which is the set of rules and prescriptions that guide the proper use of language, both written and spoken. Without this foundation, it would be impossible to decipher God's name accurately. I would also like to highlight that my discussion will focus on ancient Hebrew, archaic Hebrew, Phoenician and Canaanite languages, not the modern Hebrew spoken in Israel today. Modern Hebrew is not suitable for analyzing names or terms that belong to such an ancient context, as it does not reflect the linguistic characteristics of the ancient languages found in the original biblical texts. Therefore, to study God's name faithfully according to the ancient texts, it is essential to use the more archaic forms of these languages, which are very different from the contemporary Hebrew that we learn in schools today. This attention to detail is crucial in order to understand the roots and meanings of names in the scriptures. Now let's begin addressing the topic at hand. An interesting aspect of the group that argues God's name is Yahush is that they often criticize those who speak Romance languages, such as Portuguese and Spanish. They do this primarily because these people use the terms Deus and Dios to refer to God, arguing that these words originated from Zeus, the Greek god. However, this idea is incorrect. Additionally, another point they often raise is that it is forbidden to use the term Lord to refer to God because, according to them, Lord derives from Baal, a Canaanite deity. They argue that because of this, both Deus and Lord would be inappropriate, suggesting that we should avoid using them and instead use terms like the Most High or the Eternal. However, this interpretation is misguided. There is no issue with calling God Deus or Lord. The term Deus, for example, has Indo-European origins and has no connection to Zeus, the Greek god. In fact, the name Deus comes from the Proto-Indo-European Deus, which means brilliant, illuminated, or even spirit. This term was used in various Indo-European languages to refer to a deity or supreme being, without any association to the beliefs or names of other religious pantheons. Therefore, the claims that using God or Lord is wrong, or that these terms have pagan connotations, do not hold up historically. These are legitimate words with distinct origins, unrelated to the Greek gods or other deities. Now, regarding the Hebrew language, an important question arises. Was there any way to represent vowels in ancient Hebrew? In the case of Phoenician and ancient Hebrew, both are known as consonantal languages, meaning they did not have vowels in their alphabet. The ancient Hebrew alphabet, for instance, consisted of 22 letters, including sin and shin, which were considered a single letter. These early inscriptions did not use signs for vowels, but later some of the 22 consonants were used to represent vowel sounds, aiding in pronunciation. An example of this is the word gamal, GML, meaning camel. The three consonants in this word are gimel, G, mem, M, and lamed, L. In modern Hebrew, we have the Masoretic signs, which help represent vowels, but in ancient Hebrew, native speakers relied on memory and traditional pronunciation to pronounce the words correctly. For this reason, Hebrew is called a consonantal alphabet, because initially only the consonants were written, with vowels being implied through context and the speaker's memory. This characteristic of ancient Hebrew is one of many peculiarities that make the language fascinating, demonstrating the complexity and richness of its origins. For example, in the work Biblical Hebrew, a new approach, using discourse analysis by B. M. Rosine, it is mentioned that the Hebrew Bible was originally written with an alphabet different from the one we use today. Scribes began to use the square Aramaic alphabet, which is the same alphabet we see in the modern Hebrew Bible, only after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. Originally, the Hebrew Aramaic Bible was written with consonants only, meaning it had no vowels. Many scholars believe that, over time, some consonants began to serve as vowel indicators. In another work, Biblical Hebrew, by Mark D. Futato, it is explained that, in its original phase, Hebrew was written without any vowel indication. Letters like Sade, Dalet, and Kuef, for example, could mean righteousness, or they are righteous. This phase corresponds to a period before King David's reign, between 1400 BCE and 1000 BCE. During the intermediate phase, several letters of the alphabet began to be used to indicate certain vowel sounds, with a notable example being the letters Sade, Dalet, Quof, and Vav, which could represent the idea of righteousness or they are righteous. This phase corresponds to the period after King David's reign, approximately between 1000 BCE and 300 BCE. Finally, in the final phase of Hebrew development, marks were added to the text to eliminate ambiguities. These markings, known as vowel signs, allowed letters like Sade, Dalet, Quof, and Vav to have more precise meanings, so they are righteous became a clearer reading. This period of adding vowel signs corresponds to the interval between 700 CE and 1000 CE. Thus, as we can see, some letters of the Hebrew alphabet began to be used to indicate vowels, but this process occurred in later times, specifically after the Babylonian exile. This explains why, in Hebrew, some words can be written in different forms, with variations reflecting the linguistic changes over time. Now let's examine how this applies to the Tetragrammaton, the name of God, which is written in ancient Phoenician Hebrew as follows: Yod, He, Vav, and He. An interesting point, rarely mentioned, is that the final letter, the He, is apparently a later addition and was not part of the original archaic version. Archaeological and pictographic discoveries, such as the famous Mount Ebal tablet, show the name of God written only with the letters Yod, He, and Vav, omitting the final He. This suggests that the addition of the He may have occurred at a later period. Returning to the text, we have only consonants with no vowels. The first letter, Yod, has a well-defined sound, pronounced like the Y in yes. The question of why some Jews pronounce the name as Yahweh and not Yahoo is related to linguistic evolution. This happens because, over time, the sound of the He was softened or even omitted. This phenomenon of linguistic simplification is common, as to make speech faster and more natural, sounds can be reduced or left out. This process is observable in many languages. For example, in Portuguese, the word amor can be shortened to amo in everyday speech, and in English, the phrase "I don't know" often transforms into "I dunno" in quick conversation. Similarly, the sound of he in ancient Hebrew, like other sounds in different languages, may have been softened or omitted over time, reflecting a natural tendency of language to economize effort in speech and simplify communication. This phenomenon shows how linguistic evolution shapes the way we pronounce words and names across generations. I'll use a simple example here with a very popular word in Hebrew, hallelujah. The correct way to pronounce this word is actually hallelujah, not alleluia, as it is commonly said. In Hebrew, the term is divided into two parts, hallelu, meaning praise, and Yah, which is an abbreviated form of the name of God. The sound of the letter he at the beginning of the word Yah is crucial, but in modern Hebrew, this sound is progressively being lost, as happens in many words in the language. This shows a process of phonetic simplification in which sounds like he are omitted. In the Hebrew Bible, it is common to find names that directly reference the name of God. These names are called theophoric names and generally include one of the prefixes or suffixes related to the divine name. Some examples of this are the prefix Yeho and the suffix Yahu, which appear in names like Yehoshua, Joshua, and Yirmeyahu, Jeremiah. These forms were originally constructed with the combination of the letters Yod and He, forming Yah, which is an abbreviation of the divine name and has a characteristic Semitic pronunciation. It is worth noting that natively the He has a very clear meaning, representing the letter H in the Hebrew alphabet. When combined with the Yod, it forms the sound Yah. But this sound doesn't appear directly in the biblical text, often being omitted or softened over time as the language evolves and adapts to new pronunciations. Now, talking about the letter Vav in modern Hebrew, the sound of this letter is clearly the V sound, as in the word Vav. However, in ancient Hebrew, the sound was not exactly V. A clear example of this can be found in the word vomer, which means "and said." In modern Hebrew, the word is pronounced vomer, but in ancient Hebrew, the pronunciation would have been yomer, with the W sound, not V. Several studies on ancient Hebrew indicate that the Vav had the sound of a W, as in wa, not a V. This is also confirmed by the Yemeni Jews, or Mizrahi Jews, who are known for preserving one of the closest forms of ancient Hebrew, both ethnically and linguistically. In their Hebrew, the word vomer is also pronounced yomer, demonstrating that the sound of Vav was actually the sound of W. Now, talking about the last letter, he, some people interpret it as meaning E, but this letter was not part of the ancient Semitic languages in the same way. In ancient Semitic languages, the main vowels heard in words were A, I, and U. This means that, in the original form of God's name, the final sound would have been closer to Yahweh, with the final A having an open sound, like the A in peace, and not the E. The reason some people pronounce Yahweh with the final E instead of Yahweh may stem from later translations or interpretations made during the medieval period, when systems of vocalization began to be introduced into Hebrew. Therefore, considering the linguistic evidence and phonetic changes over time, the original name of God in archaic Hebrew probably had the sound Yahweh. If you've watched until here, leave a like and share in the comments which form of God's name you believe is the most correct, Yahweh, Yahu, or Yahweh. If you enjoyed the video, like and share it with your friends. God bless, and I'll see you soon.